Hey guys, Trevor here. Welcome to another episode of the Who Are We podcast. I've got a special guest with me, Maria. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, just a little bit of a disclosure. We're just recording this session and we might publish it on YouTube, maybe do some promotions on LinkedIn or whatever, just trying to get out there different perspectives and different ideas about identity and who we are, maybe inspire other people to create better outcomes in society. That's what this is all about. So with that, we might get straight into it. Who is Maria and what does she stand for?
So I've been working in the disability field for about 12 years now. Like as an allied health professional, I run a business as well as I have lived experience of disability as well. For the last 22 years, I've been supporting my son who had a brain injury as a baby. And so I suppose my life goal and mission, really is to create an inclusive world, for people with disabilities, people that are disadvantaged in some regards. And I think it's just been like my mission to create inclusive communities. And my background is actually I grew up in a very coercively controlling environment where I didn't have a chance to sort of develop into myself and who I was, where I saw a lot of coercion. I saw a lot of anger, lots of punishment. So using punishment and rewards to kind of dismantle your sense of self and critical thinking and your ability to identify what it is that you stood for. So I suppose working in the disability field now and mental health, I've really found that I really think that the inoculation for pretty much everything in life, like all the horrific things that happen, like domestic violence, trafficking, child abuse, rape, even wars, is really about every single person being in touch with who they are, being in touch with their value system and what matters to them, and creating safe and inclusive communities that are not based on coercion and control. And they're not based on one person, the kingpin, with all the ideas, usually with their own sort of charismatic and ideas and belief systems and the dark triad. And a lot of times we see someone at the top that's quite harmful, and they almost create this ugly environment of people down the bottom who become almost what would you say, sort of like they start abusing people based on what this person at the top wants them to do. So they become and we see this as well in all sorts of high control environments. So I think that's really important. Accountable leadership, non-violent communication, helping people to just create those environments that are based on reinforcement and based on everyone having human rights. So that's what I'm super passionate about. Yeah.
That's amazing, and thanks for doing the work you do. It sounds like you're very passionate about that, and I'm sorry for any trauma that you may have faced in your childhood to lead you to this profession. But obviously, with every problem that you faced, you've created a positive out of it, and hoping to create better outcomes for the future, which is commendable for you. I got from your conversation that inclusive communities where identified values, individual values are respected and obviously empowered in some way is something that you're passionate about. How do you go about creating that? It seems like that's quite a challenge to be able to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we see now is a lot of people looking for community. I think this happens in times of uncertainty when we are not comfortable with maybe the services and systems that are in place. And I think, it happened around the 60s, late 60s, around that Vietnam War. And a lot of people, the hippies, and, they were looking for something new. And, and there was that free love and community. And so there was a lot of these kind of coercive groups that started around that time. And, and I'm sort of a product of that. And I saw the incredible suffering and pain that happens when we try to create these really like utopian sort of communities, so to speak, because what happens is they become even more controlling and more violent than sort of the wider community, because to have perfect inclusion, to have that perfect sort of no one ever questioning or challenging leaders and everyone being, towing the party line, that becomes its own sense of violence and coercion. So I think really to create these safe communities, it's about diversity. And it's not just diversity of shapes, colors, and sizes. It's about diversity of thought, It's about diversity of people's, their own belief systems. And it's about, there's a study that I read the other day about hospitals, the ones that were more sort of psychologically safe actually had much more issues and much more, let's say, things that had gone wrong or something, like, someone giving the wrong medication or errors or something. And that doesn't sort of make sense, does it? Like, why would it be the better environments that have more errors? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think the stress of attaining perfection, or especially the expectation of perfection, can create stress and errors in performance. I think having a more natural environment where it's okay to make mistakes, because a lot of them safe spaces are very stressful because people worry about saying the wrong thing or offending someone or this and that, and it's really ripe at the moment. So from my perspective is, especially like we're in, and I, we were talking before about, psychology or whatever, or therapy or counselling. You're in a specific setting where that's maintained from a professional perspective, and that's very controlled within that environment. But when you're talking about communities or you're talking about social media, then that is not really established, that safe space. But people are probably more wanting that safe space everywhere, and it's creating a lot of friction and stress.
Yeah. So the point that I was saying, and I totally get what you're saying, because that becomes, like I said, it becomes this this kind of need for perfection all the time. But the reason why the hospitals, that had more errors were actually the better, more psychologically safe, is because people actually report it. So if you're scared to do the wrong thing, and you're scared to say the wrong thing, and you feel like you always have to be, maybe politically correct or always have all the right things to say, then, then actually what happens is people just don't talk, or people don't make those, we're not allowed to be vulnerable and make those mistakes. And so the nurses at those hospitals were so terrified of the doctors, and so the truth wasn't coming out. And the fact is, in those environments where you have to be perfect all the time, like the safe space, we can have safe spaces, but if it becomes its own sense of like having to be perfect and say all the right perfect things and never offend anyone, then that's actually when it becomes its own form of dictatorship.
Walking on eggshells.
Exactly. We can't have real conversations. We can't. And we have to be vulnerable if we want to change some of these things that are happening. We've got to be able to be honest and make mistakes. I worked in disability employment services for over 6 years, and I'd walk into to like a business and try to find someone with a disability a job, which is, unfortunately, they're much less likely to have employment, and particularly people with psychiatric disabilities. Because if someone wants to hire someone with a disability, they want them to look like it so they can get all the props. But with the psychiatric disabilities, so when I'd sit in front of an employer, a small business owner, and they said, no, we can't hire someone with a disability, then I was like, yes, I'm finally going to get the reason why. If I sat in front of an employer and they did the whole, yes, we have an equal opportunity, go on our website, then I'd be like, no, there's no chance in hell this person's getting a job. And that's where the political correctness comes in, where no one's being honest, and people are just saying whatever they want to say. But when I could sit in front of that employer and he said, we can't do it. And like, well, why can't you do it? And then he could say, well, you know what, we hired John, recently, and he never showed up to work on time. Like, I just can't, I was a small business owner. I can't have someone showing up 15, 20 minutes late. And then me, as the employment consultant, I could say, perfect, because we actually offer transport. So what if I say John can show up 15 minutes early to every shift? What do you think about that? And then we could actually have a real conversation, and that person would get a job, So that's what I believe. I think Brene Brown talks about it as well. She says we have to be vulnerable, have to have these conversations that are hard sometimes, obviously in a respectful way. So that's where I'm on board with you, where I think the safe place can be quite a sort of a dangerous thing. I think when it comes to disabilities in particular, and these social things we're trying to change, we have to be honest, and we have to
That's a great perspective that you get. And I think that comes with regulation, doesn't it? With a lot of these regulations and a lot of these things, and that creates, and if you don't do that, you're going to get sued, or you're going to get this, or you're going to get that. And like you say, people are just stealing what they think they have to say to meet the obligation of the law, or obligation of their requirements for anti-discrimination or whatever, without being honest. No, that's a great perspective, and thank you for sharing that. But it sounds like you're embracing different perspectives in an open conversation, even if they mightn't align with your thoughts. It's okay, but just having that acceptance that different people do see things differently, and having that environment where you can have a discussion about that without it being aggressive, or without trying to change other people's mind, or without trying to influence people to think like you. It sounds like that's what's important to you.
And that's how we actually change people's minds, isn't it? With empathy. I've been working in this industry for a decade, 12 years, and every time I've gone up on my soapbox and wagged my finger at people that I've done, at the beginning in particular, you just push them further into their own views. If we want to actually change minds and opinions and hearts, it comes with empathy. And I've just been reading this amazing book called Never Split the Difference. And it's a guy who is actually a hostage negotiator. So he talks about, you can't just negotiate, oh, you kill 2 hostages and I'll take 2. You have to win every time. And a big part of his is, rather than getting in stronger and negotiating, you kind of think these lawyers going, you do this, no, I'm going to pay that much. He talks about tactical empathy. And that's how he changed people's minds and hearts. He sat down in front of them and found out exactly what it is they were feeling. What was coming, what was happening for them. Why did they have that view? What did they actually want to get? What was the function of why they were doing that? And he found that is the way in, mirroring people as well, like being able to mirror what they're saying, and even their, that creates a sense of we're on the same side, right? And that's how you change minds and hearts. Like, is how we have a more inclusive world. Like, you can do it as a manipulative thing, of course, but you can also do it as a way to really make people's lives better, or to talk about subjects that are really important to you.
Yeah. And that's amazing, and that's I suppose the difference between coercive control, isn't it? And and what you say, living your life in a respectful, in a special way. The other thing I got is you talk about a lot. I don't know the term. I'm thinking maybe deflective abuse, where you talked about someone at the top of the pyramid being very abusive, and then all the other people below it, they're experiencing some abuse from them, but also they're projecting that abuse as a learned behaviour to other people behind them. And it sounded like you're describing it getting worse and worse as it goes down the pyramids, which often can be, I suppose, described as generational trauma, where the father or the family or the mother or whatever projects it to their kids, and then they grow up in that and that's how they know things, so they do it to their kids, and it gets worse and worse each generation. And breaking that cycle is one of the biggest challenges as a society that we have, in trying to take that personal responsibility to break that cycle, to show that empathy, and to have that self-care and that within ourselves to be able to pass on to that. Is that something you focused on, I suppose, through you mentioned that, you had a few issues as a child growing up. Is that something that was difficult for you to break that thought pattern?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good point. And I think, a lot of times we have things that we've been taught that don't serve us, and I think that's where, like, your whole thing is about identity, right? It's about, if we all, touch in, our minds and our emotions, that's what coercively sort of controlling people use. They manipulate our minds, they manipulate our emotions, and that reflects in our behavior a lot of times. But I genuinely feel like deep down in each one of us, if we get beyond ego and all of our pre-programming, there's everyone I've talked to, like the best doctors in the world, they want someone at their funeral to say not they were the best doctor, but that they loved their family, that they were caring people, that they were kind. Like, I think so many of us, we've got these value systems beyond all of that extra programming, and something they call it, I've got a lot of experience and knowledge in cults, and what they call it is a pseudo identity. A lot of people will join a group and they will take on the identity of the group or the cult leader, and in a family, it's kind of like a family cult. It's like, potentially there's the kingpin or the person at the top. It's not always a male. I've worked in this for a long time, but it can be someone who is, got a lot of anger and paranoia, and maybe they've got their own mental health issues, and they've got some of those dark triad sort of traits, and machiavellism and narcissism, and so then they put that pseudo identity onto those people under them, because they have to take on these techniques so they can actually survive in that environment.
Insecurity is a big one, I feel, on that. There's a lot of people that are insecure, and with their insecurity becomes, like you say, ego-driven type, to prove this, I've got to be this and demonstrate this and show how powerful I am, and that insecurity gets passed on to the next generation, and then it's quite.
It's like kill or be killed.
Yeah.
So it's like, and so I was talking to someone the other day who works in anti-terrorism, and he was explaining his therapy, and how he, supports people. You don't think of it as therapy, do you? You think of it as like, how do you deprogram this person, and put them in a thing in a chair. But the same thing, he was like, connect with them. Like, what is their humanity? What is it that they want? Do they want significance? He said, ask them about their mom. What are they trying to, what experiences are they having? So it's like getting beyond all these kind of the pseudo identity that people have had to create to survive.
Yeah.
Now we have to realize that it's a survival, it's a coping mechanism. These things, and I really think when you get to the heart of humanity and the heart of identity, and that's your identity, your neurogenic spirit, your soul, your value system, your true personality, you know, I really think that it's deep within all of us. But obviously people have to take up the call. You know, they have to decide that they don't want to live like this anymore, and in this coercion and getting their needs met through force and scaring people and deciding, you know, that they want to take accountability for themselves and find out what really matters to them. Yeah. You know,
I think with women in particular, from my experience anyway, working with some women, they put themselves second, like for their kids or their husbands and this and that, and they're always hard for them to put themselves first and understand that looking after themselves and being the best version of themselves is the best that they can do for their kids or that they can do for their husbands or that they can do for their family, because often I'm I'm hearing, they're tired or they work and they're doing this in the lunches and trying to emotionally manage all these different issues throughout the whole family, and they're absorbing all these issues into themselves and into their own identity and trying to solve and juggling 1,000 hats and this and that, but then unable to take that step back and say, hang on a minute, to better serve my family, I've got to be the best I can be. And like you say, it's hard to be able to take that plunge, I feel.
For sure. And obviously we're socialized as women to be more agreeable. Unagreeable women like me are not. Sometimes they get
troublemakers.
Yeah. Especially in the way I grew up. I was always a new person, but that's something I'm the most proud of now about myself. But I think it's very true. And I think with women, I think sometimes we can do it for our kids. We can get out of that abusive relationship. We can move ourselves on. We can start taking care, for our kids, but it's hard to do it for ourselves. So like getting people to really think, like, if this was your best friend or if this was your daughter, like what advice would you give them? What kind of relationship would you be in? And I talk about boundaries a lot with people who I work with. And boundaries are not, don't you dare blah, blah to me. Boundaries are, they invite, connection, and they preserve relationships. And boundaries are, look, if you do this, I care that much about you that I'm going to have to leave, because I don't want to stand here and have my relationship, have you screaming and yelling at me and calling me names, because then all of a sudden we don't have a relationship anymore. So when you do this, I'll do this. Yep. And that's boundary. Rather than saying my boundary is ABC, you don't do these things, because that's just control.
Yeah. And that's amazing perspective when you put it that way, and like thank you for sharing that. So it's been enlightening listening to you and your passion. Obviously, there's so much more you could talk on this issue, and we're sort of running out a bit of the time now. But have you got any final thoughts for people that may be listening, or any sort of advice or any sort of nuggets that you can provide people to maybe put in their pill bags or something as we close up?
Yeah, look, I think finding out who you are is probably the most important thing for just living a life of value. A lot of the therapy I love is positive behavior support, which is really about a peaceful world. It's about not using kind of coercion and control to control people. It's about using positive reinforcement and finding the quality, of people's lives and realizing all behavior, there's a reason behind it. So I love that. And then I also love people being able to just get in touch with who they are. And sometimes it's just like getting in tune, like, why did that commercial make you cry? Why did that thing why did you feel so deeply about that thing? And why did that book touch your heart? And just kind of every single person's got their own blueprint, their own things. And I work with people with severe disabilities, and I can tell you each one of them has a different personality, and they have a different thing that matters to them. And they have something that's their value system and that's important to them. This is human, humanity. And so I think those are the things: creating safe environments, and then creating, an identity and a value system for ourselves, because that really serves as the compass for our lives.
Embracing, it sounds like embracing who you are and living who you are and being who you are is something that you're encouraging a lot of people to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. So if people want to reach out for you or any, are you available on LinkedIn or
Yeah, absolutely. You can get in touch with me. For sure.
That's great.
Thanks, Trevor.
No worries. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, and hopefully don't be a stranger. We can keep in contact and progress together. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the amazing work you do as well, helping so many vulnerable people. I'm very grateful. And thank you for the chat today. It's nice connecting.
No worries. Thank you. See ya. Bye.
Bye.